So last week was BlackHat and Defcon. It was nothing short of an experience. From all over the world, researchers and enthusiasts alike gathered at Las Vegas, Nevada to discuss exploits and vulnerabilities going on in the cyber environment. So on today's episode of Cyber Studies, we're going to get into the learning, the observing, and the networking of Hacker Summer Camp. Let's go.
Sure.
I was very fortunate to attend a 4-day training course prior to the conference's kickoffs. Assessing and Exploiting Industrial Control Systems was the name, and it was so cool. They gave us all these cool gadgets. We got PLCs, SDRs, logic controllers, the works. And it was such a thrilling experience. I really couldn't recommend it anymore. So getting into the conferences themselves, and more particularly Defcon, you got to dive into these like buffet style rooms segregated away from like the TED Talk like keynotes. The villages allowed you to kind of get in there and mess with some cool stuff. So they had this year at the avionics village, they had like Hackasat. Adjacent to it, they did have like the automotive village where you're able to go through and use like your Flipper Zero. If you had one, you can go through and start shooting like, cool, malicious packets or whatever at these, Teslas, make the trunks pop open, what have you. They had disassembled like a control cluster where they went through and basically disassembled an old car and allowed you to get access to the OBD connector. Not big on that, but you can go through and like modify and again inject different code into these things and make it do things like set off the blinkers. You can engage things like park or gas, whatever. It was really a lot to take in. The whole room is, you went to different rooms for different types of activities. They had physical security where you can go through and learn lock picking. They actually had a bio modding village where you can have an RFID chip installed in your hand if you wanted. But the conference itself was crazy about it was that you got to indulge in as much as you wanted. There really was like lines outside of the rooms and you can get in, and then once you were able to, partake in these villages, it was just non-stop. Experts in the field were very happy to, divulge information. They even had like separate workshops at Defcon for like a nominal fee. You can go in there and like build your own badge or learn some more behind the scenes stuff that's done by vendors or small companies alike. There was just so much to do. So speaking of these TED Talk style keynotes, BlackHat more than Defcon, but Defcon did them as well. There were these really big presentations where you had particularly pen testers or, vulnerability exploit researchers. They go on the stage and they present this awesome case where like, hey, by doing this, this, and this, we can, see this. But then with this cool exploit that we developed, or this cool tool that we're putting out as of today, we can do all these crazy activities undetected. And there was literally like a circumstance where like an individual was showing how they injected malformed API calls in AWS. And they could basically kind of do a lot of different, crazy stuff completely undetected. Like it did not log any of the activity. It was bizarre. And then they also had another one where it was like Windows containers and any sort of virtualization. They're able to man in the middle with no endpoint detection on it. So you can basically just go through past whatever in between the two, and there was no alerts or anything that was popping up. And so it was like AV or MDR, whatever. Completely undetected. And for a blue teamer, it was terrible. It was a terrible experience. It was borderline depressing because you're like taking notes and you're like, what can we do to mitigate this process? And then at the very end, they're like, and it's undetected. The vendor is not interested in patching this at this time, or it's not advantageous to them until it's a problem, So it was just like, okay, we're gonna close our books. We're just gonna go visit this, on their GitHub and hope we can find some sort of detection mechanisms or what have you. The other thing that was kind of neat, more on the BlackHat side, was the vendors. There was like the business hall. It was like a whole separate conference in itself, BlackHat, Defcon, business hall. And it was monstrous. It was huge. They had like a built-in section where you can actually go through and like, try things yourself, hands-on, like live demos. But then there was also just swag. There was so much swag. I think I came home with like 42 plus shirts. I had to give them away because there was just no feasible way I was going to go through them. I had like 32 pairs of socks. But it was just so much stuff. And like you're trying to learn, you're going through the live demos of these vendors. I got to meet TCM Security and John Hammond, Huntress. It was super cool. What an awesome experience it was to meet you guys in person. Hope to see you next year. But just in general, there was just so much stuff to take in and just learn of the evolving environment. Things like AI, threat hunting, malware and forensics, not just the red team stuff, but we had some fun during the vendors, talking to them, as well as some of these like smaller, keynotes, as opposed to the big scary ones. And arguably the most important part to these conferences is the community and the networking aspect. Defcon's been around since like 1993, and it's still kicking hard. Just folks that have been there at numerous events. This was my first, but I was talking to a gentleman that's been to like the past 2 decades, minus, the one. But it's like, there's just so much, camaraderie and, community involved. Individuals just walking up and say like, hey, I haven't seen you in such a long time. Let's get, some drinks or whatever. It was such a really cool experience. You really did feel this like sense of belonging, especially at DEFCON. Now, BlackHat was really cool, but it was a different vibe. It was more of you're indulging and, interacting with the business side, though it didn't feel suit and tie. I don't really know how to describe it. You would go to both of them and you could really, you could feel the difference. BlackHat was way more organized, whereas DEFCON was more like salt of the earth, you're just kind of getting in there and getting the job done kind of a thing. You saw way more mohawks at DEFCON than you did at BlackHat. But it was really cool because, again, this is the thing. It allows us to talk about the cultural difference, the technological differences, how this stuff is all affecting our society as a whole, and then just how we as a collective are working to make it a better place. And there's the minority that don't, but I mean, go blue team, right? So I mean, all in all, the camaraderie and that's the main reason we do this, right? We come to these conferences. You can learn a lot online, arguably more than you could in person. But by getting shoulder to shoulder with someone, kind of digging into a project, we're gonna inject these packets into a pretend helicopter and watch it smoke. Just that kind of really fun stuff you probably wouldn't be able to do just watching videos on YouTube. Though I do like YouTube videos. So if you enjoyed learning about these particular conferences and want to learn a little bit more about them or just some cool stuff that happened at them in the past, check out this playlist right here. We go over some of the books that talk about cybersecurity culture. Thank you very much and have a good one.